Hey, Media People podcast listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, then you're going to love our newsletter, appropriately named the Media People Newsletter. Delivered right to your inbox, each edition is a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or go to mediapeople.beehiiv.com. That's BEEHIIV. Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts, including youtube.com/@mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. Chris Quinn is the co-founder of ProOps Consulting, a consultancy dedicated to accelerating operational efficiency and proficiency within the digital media ecosystem. Chris was born in Sudbury, Ontario, raised in Cambridge, and spent his teenage years living in Brazil and Italy. He studied business and marketing in university and college and took up an internship with a TV branding agency. He quickly learned that creative advertising wasn't for him and jumped at the chance to move into a role focused on operations with Rydium. Operations is where Chris found his groove, and his career grew to include senior-level roles at Sweet 66, Loblaw Media, Kijiji Advertising, and Loblaw Media before founding ProOps. Chris, Quinn, and I chat about living and learning on 3 different continents, being a Bob Dylan fan, returning to Canada for university, passing on a career in creative advertising, spending a decade at Kijiji, and why he decided to start ProOps Consulting.
ProOps Consulting is a media operations consultancy and advisory. What's my role entail? Well, I'm the co-founder, first and foremost, and I'm the principal consultant and advisor. If we think about what ProOps is offering this market, our mission is to help teams accelerate the growth of operational efficiencies and operational proficiency within the digital media ecosystem.
Chris, thank you so much for stopping by today. I always love having entrepreneurs on. But let's go back to the beginning. Born in Sudbury, if I got that right, and raised in Cambridge.
You got it. Yeah, I usually start with the Sudbury because that is where I was born, but we didn't spend much time up north, even though that's where both sides of my family are from.
Do you remember much of your time in Sudbury, or were you that young that you...
I was that young, but we spent a lot of summers visiting family, so grandparents on both sides and cousins and aunts and uncles and all that fun stuff.
I love the emphasis on the summer. You're like, the family went back to Sudbury because that's where the extended family was, but we went in the summer. Avoided it in the winter at all costs.
Oh, 100%, especially because at the time we were living in Cambridge and that drive is brutal if you go through the snow belt in the winter and then obviously drive north on Highway 11. So we just avoided it at all costs, but the summer was always a good time.
What was life like growing up in Cambridge?
Yeah, Cambridge, I mean, listen, Cambridge is a small kind of suburban town, very much a blue-collar town in southwestern Ontario. And we spent a lot of time outside. So, I had a lot of friends. We played tons of sports. Like playing, obviously, some video games inside as well. And this was a time in the kind of late 80s, early 90s where Nerf was having a bit of a moment. So there was a lot of Nerf battles around the neighborhood with a lot of kids. And it was fun. We had a great time.
But you didn't spend your entire childhood in Cambridge. Why did the family move to Brazil?
Yeah, quite the shocking transition, I would say. So obviously spent a good portion of my kind of upbringing in southwestern Ontario, but yeah, after grade 9, we kind of packed everything up and moved to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, for my father's telecom job. So he started doing kind of more international work in telecom, probably like 97, 98. And then he managed to get a full-time role in Rio. And this is a time too, keep in mind that a lot of third world countries, quote unquote, were basically skipping a generation of phones. So they didn't have the infrastructure for landlines.
Okay.
Rather than go to landlines, they were basically jumping to this new thing called cellular. And so a lot of his experience was in that cellular side of telecom. And he got a job down there to help build out the infrastructure and build out the services. So as a family, we kind of I finished grade 9. We spent the summer just at an aunt's house in southwestern Ontario, and then we moved to Brazil. So at the time, I had finished grade 9, and my sister, my older sister, had finished grade 11.
So when you landed in Brazil, you already alluded to a bit of shock. Take us through what the culture shock is like, because for anyone listening, Chris did a great job of setting up what Cambridge, Ontario is. I wouldn't even call it suburban Toronto. I'd be like suburban Toronto, small blue-collared city or even town. And now you're in Rio de Janeiro, where they pack them tight and stack them high. I think there are more people. I think there are more people in Rio alone than there are in maybe Ontario and Quebec combined.
Oh, easily. And not only that, it's on the ocean.
Good point.
Yeah. So even though Cambridge, we might have had a couple of lakes nearby, certainly not on the ocean or have a beach, a world-class beach. The other thing I'll just quickly mention about Cambridge too, a lot of what Cambridge was in the kind of late 80s and throughout the early 90s was Portuguese families, mostly from the Azores, and Italians. And then, a smattering of other things. But so a lot of my friends growing up were either Portuguese or Italian. And so for the next couple of questions we're going to go through here, it is funny how all of this played out.
Did you have to learn Portuguese, or were you at an English-speaking school?
Well, so yeah, so we landed in Brazil. Obviously, a bit of culture shock, and our first apartment was actually where Copacabana Beach, world famous Copacabana Beach, and Ipanema, also world famous, where they meet. And so there's little neighborhoods right there, and so you can imagine, having lived in Cambridge for many years by that point, stepping into an apartment where two beaches meet in Rio de Janeiro, overlooking the ocean, quite the scene. And then while I was there, we did go to an American school in Rio, and so that's where a lot of like the expat kids would go. And so we were like a couple of Canadians at this school, and then there was a whole bunch of American students or international students as well. And so part of being in that school, you have to learn Portuguese. Also because you're living there, you're living in the town, or I should say the city. You have to learn it. And so I spent 2 years in Rio. And to this day, I can still understand Brazilian Portuguese more than I can speak it, but I still get a little bit of practice in once in a while.
The interesting thing is, and just to preface, my wife's Brazilian. Once you hear Brazilian Portuguese enough, you can actually pick out the accent versus, say, Portuguese.
Well, and there's a distinction between a carioca, right? So someone from Rio de Janeiro versus a paulista from Sao Paulo. The carioca, the someone from Rio, the way that someone explained it to me early on is it's a beach tone, meaning it's very kind of lazy, or a lot of and so that's what I imagine. Also, growing up hearing Portuguese from Azores, Portugal, very different. I don't know what I was expecting when we moved down there, but it was difficult when I came back to visit friends or family during that time to like try to leverage the Brazilian Portuguese with those Portuguese friends in Cambridge.
Yeah, I've heard that Azores Portuguese has a completely different dialect from the mainland. And I've heard that mainland Portuguese people kind of treat people from the Azores like they're the redheaded stepson. And it was really no offense to any redheaded stepsons listening, but apparently it was Cristiano Ronaldo that really kind of turned that around, because he's from the Azores.
You would imagine too that in those days, 80s, 90s, like everywhere you went, everyone was making sweet wine in their garages and cheering on their favorite Portuguese football teams. So no shortage of things to see in Cambridge, Ontario during those days.
But your international trek didn't stop with Brazil. How did you end up in Italy?
So that was the transition after Brazil. So about kind of, I'd say midway through that second year living in Brazil, my father took a job in Boston, also for telecom, and so that was that was his career path. And I was fortunate enough to finish the year in Rio, and so at the time I lived at my parents' friend's apartment while I finished off my second year of school there. And then they essentially gave me a choice. They said, would you like to finish your high school in Boston, So at that point, I would have done grade 12. Or they said, hey, there's this Canadian school in Italy that they had known through some friends prior. And they said you could go there and do your grade 12 OAC. And so, I mean, obviously living in Rio for 2 years, I'm like, Boston doesn't sound that great. So yeah, I'd love to go to Italy. And so what ended up happening is when I applied for that boarding school, called the Canadian College of Italy, shout out to them. When I applied to that boarding school, all of the credits I had from the American school system actually afforded me to leapfrog grade 12. So I went from grade 11 right into OAC.
Oh, nice. That's convenient.
Skipping a grade was very convenient, and also it pushed me into basically the school in Italy was this tiny little school on the East Coast. So in a small town called Lanciano, very medieval little town, and it's about 100 Canadians or 100 students, and majority of them were OAC. So it was actually good that I was a part of that group, because I would say at that time it was like 90% OAC students. So they were only there for 1 year, and then they were going to go off to university somewhere.
Do you remember what province the city was in?
It was in Abruzzo. I'm
Abruzzo,
probably
okay.
butchering that. Abruzzo. And so the small town is called Lanciano. It's about, I guess, 3 hours east of Rome, give or take. Beautiful little town. And you can imagine 100 OAC students running around small town Italy.
How did you get anything done? Like, all
I'm
honestly,
not sure we did, Victor.
That's like summer camp on steroids.
Yeah, 1,000%. And if my folks listen to this, I'm sure they'll chuckle too. But that's also where I met some really great people. And so one of the guys that I met there to this day, best friends. We've since that time. So this was 2001. Lots has changed, but we could say we had that time there with a great group of people, and man, it's amazing looking back that exists. The school still exists, by the way. So if anyone's interested in sending their kids off, go ahead. But yeah, we were fortunate enough too during that time to travel all over Italy. So unlike Brazil, where we were basically in Rio, we obviously traveled a little bit over those 2 years. Italy was a great experience because it was part OAC year, which, as anyone who's experienced OAC, right, it wasn't like a full course load. And then you got to travel and see like the culture of Italy, which was really neat.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, family moves to Brazil, or not to Brazil, they moved from Brazil to Boston, and you relocated to Italy. Have I got that right?
Correct. That is correct.
Okay. Do you think you still would have made the move to Italy had you not moved to Brazil? Like, do you think Brazil was that kind of first step in building resilience for that kind of change?
Yeah, 100%. And I think one thing it also helped, I probably became a lot more relaxed, a lot more mellow with that beach culture for 2 years versus, living in Cambridge, Ontario. But going back one step, it was like at that time, my parents had a choice to move to Rio or Northern Ontario, back to Northern Ontario. And had they chosen Northern Ontario route, man, I probably would have had a very different. I'd be in a very different place than I am now. So that move, that step, one, it gets you out of your comfort zone completely, especially as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old. But also it like you get a chance to see things, experience things that you just wouldn't get otherwise. And I think for me, it also forces you to make new friends, obviously in a very different experience. A new language, which again it goes a long way when you're kind of exposed to that. And I mean, we all took French up until grade 9 here, but let's be honest, I cannot speak French to save my life. But those 2 years in Brazil, I probably learned more about a language and a culture than I would have staying in Ontario, for sure.
What were your interests or hobbies growing up?
There was a lot of sports. I probably played almost every sport you can imagine.
Is it safe to say that you were concentrated a little bit more on soccer or football through your teenage years?
Well, soccer certainly. Soccer was definitely my summer sport. Um, I like any good Canadian kid. I learned hockey, played hockey up to a certain point, and then it was very clear that my height advantage or disadvantage, however you want to call it, would not take me far. So that didn't last a whole lot. But basketball and soccer were certainly kind of my two go tos, and then baseball as well. Um, and so, loved playing those sports. And then, as I mentioned to you too, I was a big Lego kid growing up. You could put, 1,000-piece Lego in front of me, and I would spend, my entire weekend building that thing out and playing with those guys. And then, I mean, truthfully, like anything my father needed help with, I was there. So if it came to tools or building something, that was another big thing for me.
Isn't it crazy how Lego has kind of grown up with us? Like it was like a toy to occupy a kid, keep him busy in the corner, and maybe you made a cool little makeshift car. But now they've got all these like licensed lines of Lego. Like, have you heard of it? Have you heard of the term investment grade Lego, where people are buying Lego, sitting on it, and then flipping it on eBay for a profit?
I have not, but I'm not shocked. I'm also just those people who build the pieces and then put them in like glass cases. I never understand that because I always wanted to play with these things.
They made a Batman 1989 Batmobile.
Nice.
It was like, I think it was something like $400 or $500 for it. And I remember like initially they started selling it at Lego stores everywhere, and they would pop up on Kijiji going for like $600, $700, or $800. Like, it was absolutely nuts what people were willing to spend on this.
Well, I've got twin boys who they're 2.5 now, and I'm just waiting for the day that I can give them a Lego set and watch them go to town and build and play. The key thing is play with it, because I mean that's ultimately what it's there for.
Explain to us why both your father and Bob Dylan were your influences growing up. Let's start first with Bob Dylan. How did you discover him?
Yeah, I didn't really get into music until I was in high school. Truthfully, I mean, I obviously heard music, listened to music, but I really didn't sit down and enjoy it until I was in high school, and really until I was in Brazil. Um, and I discovered Bob Dylan. I think it was through a friend of mine at that school, and he had all kinds of great music. Everything from Bob Dylan to I'll say Dr. Dre to Rage Against the Machine. Like he was eclectic, and so that exposed me to a bunch of different genres. Whereas up to that point, just listen to the radio, in the car pre-Brazil, I was probably just listening to classic rock or whatever station my parents had on. But I discovered Bob Dylan, and it was the lyrics, it was the tone, it was the sound of the music that I really enjoyed. And I think I had one CD, which was the best of, and it was all from his earlier stuff, so it was all acoustic. And I probably listened to that 1,000 times, just on repeat most days and nights. And it doesn't hurt that he's got a great song called "The Mighty Quinn," Quinn the Eskimo.
Yep, I'm familiar with that one.
Yep,
Everybody's going to jump for joy.
That's right. And so that became a hit for me whenever I was in charge of the DJing, music playing. Yeah. And then to the other question about my dad. I mean, yeah, I spent a lot of time. My dad taught me the sports that I could play. He was always showing me, and I was always helping him, build things, fix things. And so, growing up, he's probably the reason that I like Lego so much. Is he was someone who could figure things out. If you just put a problem in front of him, he could figure it out. You put a project in front of him, he just got it done. And so that obviously, shaped kind of some of the things I was interested in, and just how I approach things too. I like solving problems, and just you just get things done at the end of the day. It's like I don't want to sit and talk about it. I'd rather just do it.
I always ask my guests what their first job ever was, and usually I get one of three things: babysitter, worked in retail, worked in fast food. But you're the first one who worked as a laborer in a vineyard at Prince Edward County. So how did that job come about?
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny too because I was listening to one of your other episodes, ex-colleague of mine, and I had to think about that. I was like, wow, okay, I really did that. So This was a moment in time um, after Brazil. So it was in the summer after Brazil. This is before I went on to live in Italy. So we came back to Ontario just for the summer, the family, and we were staying at my aunt's cottage, which happened to be in Prince Edward County, right near Sandbanks. So kind of Picton, Cherry Valley area. And I knew I needed to get a summer job, obviously to help pay for some of what would become Italy for a year. And there was a guy who was looking for labor, required no resume. He just picked you up one day and you worked for a day, and you either de-weeded vineyards, you strung the lines that the vines hung on, or you put posts in the ground, or you sprayed fields anywhere. And then he would drop you off 12 hours later and say, okay, great, good job, I'll pick you up tomorrow at 6. And that was my, I guess, interview for that first day. And then I spent the next probably 6 weeks or so working in the vineyards. So it was a tiring summer, but I probably haven't been more tanned. Obviously, coming from Brazil, too, I had a bit of a tan after 2 years, which I probably couldn't get if again my life depended on it. But yeah, it was fun. It was interesting. I had a great time, and just being outside too, I was thankful for that.
What about being alone with your thoughts? Because I've done a couple of labor jobs growing up, specifically cutting grass on a golf course. And I got to tell you, I love that they give you your assignment in the morning, and then they just kind of leave you alone to just get it done by the time you punch out. How did you feel about that?
I enjoy that. I really don't mind it. Plus, I mean, at the time, I probably had my Walkman with me, and so I just listened to music for most of the day. And then, I mean, keep in mind too that a lot of the day laborers in these vineyards, they're always chirping and chatting. So a couple of good old boys out in the fields just having a good time, ripping on each other. So that passed the time as well. But yeah, in those moments where you're kind of on one part of the field doing your own thing, I enjoy it. To this day, I still like to sit. I've got a cottage up in Bala, and I like to sit and I enjoy the quietness sometimes. Now, having 2 toddlers, obviously, I don't get that as often anymore, but I enjoy those peaceful moments when I can.
What brought you back to Canada for university? It sounds like you could have gone anywhere you wanted to. The family was based in Boston, but you chose to attend Trent University. And why did you study business administration?
When I was applying for universities, so keep in mind the school in Italy is a Canadian school, so it's based on the Canadian curriculum. It's owned by Canadians, and when you apply for university there, they tend to lean towards Canadian universities, which absolutely worked fine for me. I knew I wanted to come back to Canada after 3 years, and so I had a chance. I was accepted on the West Coast, East Coast, and then to a couple of schools here in Ontario. Trent interested me because it was a small school. And by that point, I had been in nothing but small schools, right? I mean, in Cambridge, small school; in Brazil, small, international school, and then the Canadian college, really only 100 students. So I was okay with it being a small university. Plus the fact that it was outdoors in the Kawarthas, right, in a bit of a cottage country, that appealed to me. Plus, I knew that it was closer to Toronto. I had friends who had stuck around and kind of moved to Toronto by that point. So I wanted to come back and be closer to that. And then let's be honest too. I mean, the business program also interested me because at the time I thought I wanted to be a philosophy major. And the first thing the dean of the Canadian school in Italy said was, "You can't make any money being a philosophy professor." And that struck me because I was like, "Oh, yeah, that's a fair point." And he's like, "You know what you should do? Just go into business." And I did. and to be honest, I'm glad I did. I didn't know why I chose it, but I'm glad I did because I think it was one of the best decisions I've made.
And after graduation, you re-enrolled at Humber College in their marketing marketing management and advertising program. What attracted you to that, and what gaps did that program fill that you might have had in your education from Trent?
Yes. So in the last couple of years at Trent, I was doing more of the marketing branding courses, and that always attracted me because of it's more the creative side of business, right? So marketing in general. And so because of that, I knew, okay, if I really wanted to go into that space, it would be really good if I had the opportunity for an internship. And the program at Trent, the business administration program, didn't really incorporate internships into that. And so I knew I was going to move to Toronto after university. And so when I did, I quickly discovered that, hey, if I'm going to make a real go at getting into this space, I think I should get another year where I could get an internship as part of that program. So Humber offered that. And so as part of the program, you need to do an internship, whether it's paid or unpaid. And I will admit, I did an unpaid internship. You learn a lot when you're working and not getting paid. But it gave me kind of the nice stepping stone to then know kind of what to expect, or at least, to get my foot in the door here in Toronto.
Was this your internship at a television branding agency?
It was, and I wish I could remember the name. It'll haunt me, and I'll probably message you at some point and be like, the name was this. But yeah, it was basically it was run by a single creative. He was the visionary of the company. He was the one he was like the creative mind, and all of us were in support of his vision and what he wanted. And he was doing all kinds of different like show introductions, and like the kind of he even had his own production of a like nightclub show at the time. So it was a very interesting, and I think I worked there for 6 months unpaid during my time at Humber. And it taught me a lot, because basically you just have to go in there and help support and do what you need to do. And he required us to be super organized, like get out of your comfort zones, like call people, talk to people. And so I met some really great people while I was working there, and it was interesting, to say the least.
But you realized in this role that the creative side of the business wasn't for you. And this is really interesting, because when I get a chance to lecture at some of the college programs, a lot of the young kids there are all about the creative side. Like, they're thinking about being on set like you were in this job, storyboards, building those out, writing scripts, brainstorming new ideas. Why wasn't this appealing to you?
Um, it's a great question. As creative as I thought I was, so growing up, listening to music, drawing, that always appealed to me as a concept. However, in practice, I leaned a lot more towards the math, the organization, like the business side of it. And so during my internship there, it was very clear to me that if that's what a creative was, so the guy who ran the agency, if that's what a creative is, okay, that's not me. And so I was okay with that. It was a great learning experience. I just knew that I wouldn't be able to deliver on those kind of creative concepts, always re-envisioning, always coming up with something different. But where I did see promise was, in executing on those visions, in executing on how do I take that idea and actually make it real. That appealed to me during that time.
I love that your next job, or we could say this after your internship, your first job in media marketing, going down that operations route with Rydium, you found that job on, was it either Monster or Workopolis? Like, when I was reading this, I was like, I have not heard this since, like, we got to go back to 2007. Like, do they even still exist, those two sites?
I don't think so. At least you'd be hard pressed to find much in terms of listings on either one of those. So yeah. So I answered a job posting. It was either from Workopolis or Monster. I know I was looking at both at the time because they were huge at that point, or at least they felt huge. And all it asked for was a university degree, someone who could work in Excel, and can solve problems, or at least is interested in solving problems. And obviously, when you look at the title of an ad ops specialist at that point, it was called an ad trafficker. And you're like, what is an ad trafficker? Like, what is this world of ad ops? I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I showed up for the interview, as they teach you in business school and even, at Humber. I showed up in a suit, doing my best to impress for a job. And the guy who interviewed me walked in the room, and he was wearing a Raptors jersey, sleeveless Raptors jersey, cargo shorts, and sneakers. And I was like, well, hold on a second. What is this? And first thing he said, or one of the first things he says, yeah, you don't have to wear suits here. I was like, oh, okay, cool. And then, he offered me the job shortly thereafter. And that first job at Rydium Canada, so shout out Mark Thomas, who was running that, still is. It turned into Sweet 66 shortly thereafter. But that's where I kind of learned about the world of ad ops from a platform called Right Media Exchange. And I learned kind of the performance side of the digital media space. And this was 2007, like you said.
What got you excited about it? Because you're still at the ground level of your career. Like, this is a perfect time for you to move on again if you don't like it. So what was it about the role that said to you, maybe I want to stick with this for a couple of years? This might be my career.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I mean, the space was so unknown unless you were in it. Like, on the outside looking in, no one knew what was going on in the world of ad exchanges and digital banners, digital ads, actually making some money. And so the fact that you got to play with technology, right, that appealed to me. And then it was all like basically number crunching, right? And at the time too, keep in mind, we were running nothing but CPA campaigns. And so you had to be very aware, and you had a lot of attention to detail on the money you were spending and the money you were earning, because that balance is what makes or breaks small businesses, as you know. And so that was very much like, talked to me in terms of, okay, now you're responsible for something, and you get to play with these kind of technical tools. Not only that, but we had a lot of fun doing it. I mean, these were the early days of ad exchanges, and very early days of ad exchanges, pre-real-time bidding as well. So once you make a decision to spend some money, you got to wait hours before you realize, did it work? Did it not? Did we make any money? I don't know. So it was kind of like day trading to a degree, but you're really just buying and selling ad space. And also keep in mind, this was 2007, small company doing fairly well in that space. We had a lot of fun. There was a lot of great parties at the time. And so, 23 years old, that appealed to me. Like, you got to work in an office, and like you had to do your job as well as you could, but then you got to have a ton of fun after work. And there's nothing better if you're in your early 20s and around that time when people were still having a lot of fun.
We're going to take a quick break. Enjoying this episode? Of course you are, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Complement your listening experience by subscribing to the Media People newsletter at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or at mediapeople.beehive.com. It's a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or mediapeople.beehive.com. How did your role change when you were promoted to Director of Ad Operations at Rydium?
Yeah, so I mean, that was my foray into being a manager, being a leader. And so it was one of those good timing, like right place, right time scenarios. I had spent a lot of time digging in and just learning the platform during that first, year or so, and then the folks who were leading the team, who were leading the ad ops team, the ad trafficking team, they moved on. And so the business wanted someone to take over. I was there. I knew it. The folks that I worked with were also kind of in support of it. And so they offered me the role. Mark Thomas offered me the role there. And I went from an individual contributor to then a bit of a player coach. So I was responsible for the team, small team, but still, but also responsible for running campaigns and responsible for invoicing and a bunch of other things. So I went from wearing maybe one or two hats to wearing 5-6 hats.
What was that transition like for you? I mean, you're to use a sports analogy, you're a player, and I know you said it was a player coach role, but now you kind of move off the field a little bit and you're more of a coach. You've got people that are really dependent on your advice and your leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it, to be honest with you. Obviously, like when you make that transition from individual contributor to leadership, it's a bit of a scary roller coaster. I mean, now you're not just responsible for what you do; you're responsible for what everyone does as a collective. And what comes with that is not just the work; it's you're dealing with people. So I actually I enjoyed it. I learned a lot, as you would when you kind of put in a position like that. But I think that was probably where I learned that, hey, it's okay to take risks and it's okay to take on the responsibility, because at the end of the day, it's still a learning opportunity. And that's what we were doing. We were just literally just figuring things out, especially, with regards to what we were doing in terms of media buying. But also just for my role specifically, just being able to kind of work across the different stakeholders, plus train a team, hire people. I liked it, and I had always liked learning new things, so for me it was not as scary as maybe it sounds. But I will say, like, in any role that I've done now preceding this, I I look back and I think, wow, okay, I'm glad I took that risk. I could have easily said I'm not ready, or could have easily said no thanks, um, but I did, and I'm grateful I didn't.
From there, you moved to Olive Media. And just a shout out to the other Olive Media
Yes,
alumni who have participated: Christy Painting, Teresa Smith, Jordan Brooks. So you're number four. And without naming names, there's going to be a fifth Olive Media person on the podcast shortly. We haven't recorded it yet.
we're
I got to group
everywhere.
all the Olive. You guys are everywhere. And so let's talk first about what brought you to Olive Media, and talk to us about your role as brand response specialist. And start by also telling us what brand response is, because that's a term that is not used anymore, but it was thrown around quite heavily in the early 2000s, or late 2000s, I'd say.
Correct. Yeah, and very much an ad network
Yes, it's an
term.
ad network term.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So what brought me to Olive Media? So at the time, Olive was also using the same ad exchange, so the Right Media Exchange, which was um, I think during that time it was purchased by Yahoo, so it was a Yahoo platform, and so there were very few people in Toronto that knew how to run campaigns on that exchange. It was a very small pool of people, of ad traffickers, ad ups, people that used it. And so the guys that hired me, so the guy that hired me, and then his kind of like his counterpart at Rydium, they had left Rydium and went to Olive Media to work with Mladen Reykjavik. And so those two guys then, by that point, decided to leave Olive and go to Yahoo. And so they knew who I was. They knew that I had taken over at Rydium, then called Sweet 66 by that point. And they said, hey, Mladen, you should probably reach out to this guy named Chris Quinn. He knows how to use this system. He's close, like our offices were about a block apart. And, they seemed to think I was a good guy, which was nice. So Mladen called me and we got to talking, and yeah, one thing led to another. And I said yes. And literally, the change of direction when I was going to the office was, rather than going to Adelaide and Spadina, I went to King and Peter, which if you know those corners, they're not very far apart. And so that was 2008 when I started there, like near the end of 2008. And really what it was, so now going back to your brand response question, all of brand response, as we were known, it was the performance team within all of media. And so it was run by Mladen Reykjavik, as I mentioned. And we were responsible for basically the performance-based campaigns, the CPA, CPC-based campaigns, on both the unused slash, as it was called, remnant inventory on the exclusive representation sites that Olive had, as well as the exchange that we were on at the time, which was Rydium Media. And so basically you're running these campaigns anywhere you can to try to drive performance and keep cost and margins in place.
And how did those responsibilities change when you were promoted to the team lead for brand response?
Yeah, so keep in mind. So I went from Rydium, who director role at a very small company is obviously titles abound here, but I went to an individual contributor when I moved to Olive because it was new, something to learn, and so then moving into the team lead role, I was once again a bit of a player coach, to keep that analogy. And I was responsible indirectly for a few of the folks that I worked very closely with to drive those performance campaigns. So to run those performance campaigns. So rather than having, 3 or 4 people that, the different managers across Olive would have to go to and work with, they would come to me and I would help kind of balance the workload and then not only run the campaigns, but also work with the inventory sources that we had. So whether it was setting up the remnant inventory on the exclusive sites that Olive kept bringing in to the fold at that time, but also finding new inventory sources across the exchange. And then thirdly is we went through an ad server migration very, very quickly after that, where we moved from the Rydium Media Exchange to AppNexus. And so that role was responsible for ensuring that our inventory sources and our campaigns were still running when we made that migration.
Something you said about a minute ago, I want to go back to. You went from being a leader at Sweet 66 to doing an individual contributor role at Olive Media. Was that a difficult move for you, going from leading people, knowing that you wanted to continue leading people, moving to a new company, a bigger company, and taking a slightly different role? Did you have to convince yourself to do that? Because just calling it what it is, a lot of people would have to put their ego aside. Not saying you're egotistical or anything like that, but they would have to put their ego aside to move out of, say, a leadership role into something that's less of a leadership role at a different company.
Sure. And if I was also the type of person that kind of thought too much about this, the title change would also have probably stung a little, but it didn't. Olive Media, it was growing faster than Rydium / Sweet 66 at the time. So that was interesting. The other part too is that they had some pretty major brands that they were responsible for at that point. So that was interesting. Plus, Mladen's a great sales guy. He's very good at what he does. And so it was one of those things where, because they were working on so much, there was so much going on. They had great investment, as you heard from Christy and Teresa, from Torstar and Jessica. It just seemed like a much bigger opportunity, not only from a career, but just from a learning experience. So I didn't think twice, to be honest with you. It was a little bit different, but I was 2 years into my career. I mean, what do I know? I would rather learn more than kind of stick with one thing for so long. And any of the kind of career moves I've made too, I don't think about it in terms of time. I think about it in terms of what I can learn. And so that was kind of that step that I was taking, was to learn something new.
And I imagine you learned a ton at Kijiji, because we're going to jump into this behemoth. You spent almost 10 years there, and your first role was their head of ad operations on the sell side.
Correct. Yeah. 10 years sounds wild in the digital media space, but there's a few of us who were there a long time, and I was surrounded by a great group of folks during that time. But yeah, so I moved to Kijiji from Olive Media to take over like leading the ad operations team. And by that point, so I was 3 years at Olive, by that point, or just over 3 years at Olive. And the ad network space where you're buying and selling inventory, but you don't own anything. You were truly arbitraging, right? In the media space. I was missing the knowledge, the experience of what owning the inventory or like directly managing the inventory and then selling to those networks or selling to those exchanges was like. Like I just didn't have that on my resume. I didn't understand it as well as I would have liked. And at the time, Olive had hired a full-time ad ops manager. So I was a team lead. There was a few of us team leads across the ad ops group. They had hired someone because that person understood both the sell side and the buy side. And I thought, okay, that's what I need to do. I think I need to understand the sell side a little bit more. And so one of my colleagues from Olive had actually moved to Kijiji prior. And when that role came up, it was a replacement role for an incumbent who was still there. I interviewed, I think, 2 people, and then they offered me that job pretty quickly. And so shout out to Mark Lister, who was running the advertising side at Kijiji in 2011 for taking a chance on someone and handing me the keys to basically run ad ops and do like all of the work, because at that time they had just really started monetizing the site, but there was a lot to clean up, a lot to build.
We also give Mark Lister a shout out for having a very concise hiring process, because that doesn't exist very often anymore.
No, and for anyone listening who has worked with or has been on the other side of the table versus Mark Lister, he is a very black and white individual. He does not mince words, and you know very easily what he's thinking, but also when he makes a decision, he's all in, and it doesn't take him long to make decisions. So I'll give him a big shout out because he was. So I reported into him for up until 2017. So 6 years, and during that time we did a lot. We had a lot of fun, but we also worked pretty hard.
Before we go any further with this, just want to clarify for the international listeners what Kijiji is, because I only learned this a couple of years ago that Kijiji is very specific to Canadian market, but it's part of the eBay family.
It was, yeah. At that time, it was part of eBay Classifieds Group. And so Kijiji.ca, Kijiji Canada, it was a classified site, is a classified site. And it was part of a larger portfolio, a global portfolio of classified sites that was owned by eBay under their umbrella eBay Classifieds Group. And so, some of our biggest classifieds, like sister sites, would be there was Gumtree in Australia. There was also Gumtree UK. There was Kleinanzeigen in Germany, which was the biggest classified site there. You had Marktplaats, which was in the Netherlands, and so on and so on. There was classified sites globally in most major markets, I would say. And so we were part of that group, and that was a massive benefit because you're part of a global group, and our head office for classifieds was actually in Amsterdam. And so we spent a lot of time traveling during those early years to meet and talk with our counterparts in the other markets. Because one thing about eBay Classifieds Group is they try to centralize a lot of the learning and share a lot of the learnings across all of the different markets. So I was afforded the ability to travel to Europe on a number of occasions, to Australia, to the US, to really learn from my peers, which was a great experience. Just to round that out, sorry, it's no longer owned by eBay. So it was sold to a Norwegian company before I went to Loblaw. And now I think it's owned by private equity. So it's gone through a few changes.
How did your role change when you were promoted to head of commercial operations?
Yeah, so at the time I was just focused on ad ops, obviously sell side. So in terms of monetizing our banner and text space across the site, so all the third-party ads. And then Mark Lister, who I reported directly into, took on more of a commercial role across Kijiji. So Kijiji had a number of revenue streams at that time. One was advertising, right, which is what we were working on. The other was the kind of small business streams. So if you think about Kijiji and what they offered, if you were a car dealer, you had to pay a little bit to post your feeds of your cars that were on your lots or available to sell. There was we had a jobs, going back to the jobs comment. We had a jobs vertical, and so employers would pay to list their jobs. Real estate agents would pay to list their listings, et cetera, et cetera. And so his role then took on basically all revenue streams. And he asked me to support all of those revenue streams from an operations standpoint. So that role then supported not just the advertising side, but it also supported things like invoicing, billing and collections, sales operations for our internal and external sales teams. So not just advertising related. And of course, keep the day-to-day of the ad ops team and all that stuff.
And how did the role change again when you moved into head of advertising, sell side?
2017 was a big shakeup year at Kijiji. Mark Lister exited the business. They brought in a new general manager to run Kijiji Canada. I saw it as an opportunity for me to basically take on all of the monetizations, all of the advertising side. And so I basically put my hand up to the business and said, hey, commercial operations has been interesting, but I want to go back to the advertising side. I want to not only lead ad ops, but I want to lead everything involved in that P&L. So that included sales, strategy, product, which I was already managing on the ad ops side, and basically take this thing and own it. They said yes. So again, I asked, they said yes. So be careful what you ask for. And so that was my foray into then managing a sales team, managing all of the client relationships that came along with that. So if we had any of the upfront agreements with the agencies, et cetera, while also managing the delivery side through a great group of folks.
But it's not that you asked. You went to them with a vision or a proposal. Do you think if you just asked, you would have had it? Or do you think having that vision or proposal is really what pushed it over the edge for you?
Yeah, like anything else, you can't just like blindly ask for something. You have to build a bit of a case. And by that point, so this was 2017. I've been in the industry for 10 years, and so I knew that I had to come to the table with an argument that made sense, with a vision that would help the business. And so, yeah, I had to do a little bit more work than just ask. But that's also, the operations guy in me says, hey, if it doesn't make sense, don't do it. But here's why it could make sense. And then I had to flex a little bit of the sales side and be like, okay, now I've got to sell this vision a little bit. And so you got to make sure it's a compelling argument, but that you've done your homework as well. And I was fortunate enough that they saw what I saw, and I had the backing of the entire team, not just the sales team, but the ad ops team and everyone who worked with us, because I was already working with everyone, all the business stakeholders at that point. Great relationship with finance, great relationship with product and tech. And so that helped, I think, just in convincing that this was a good opportunity.
Okay, so let's talk about your tenure at Kijiji. We already joked about it, but it's not really a joke. Spending 10 years at a single digital media company is like an eternity in this business. So I have to imagine over those 10 years, you were approached by other companies to come over and work for them. What kept you at Kijiji?
The first thing I'll say is the people. If you like who you work with, it doesn't feel like 10 years goes by. Let's put it that way. So shout out to them. And they'll know who they are if they're listening to this. Secondly, was we never sat back and waited for the industry to move on. We were always trying to stay at the forefront of where the industry was going, what was becoming popular, and so it was a constant learning experience. And as a publisher too, I think that's a really important thing to know and to understand is you have to have the flexibility and you have to have the mindset to be able to change with the industry, because the industry is not going to wait around for you to like get up to speed, especially if you're trying to monetize ad space. So that was one of the things that just, there was never really a time that was the same as the previous. So every Q1, we'd look back at the previous quarter, previous year, and be like, what do we do right or wrong? What should we change? And throughout the year, like you'd set a strategy, you'd set your priorities, then things happen. The industry, name an acronym, a new acronym pops up. You have to learn it. You have to adjust. And so that was one of the things I always made sure we did a lot of at that time. And that keeps you on your toes. So I really didn't see an opportunity outside of Kijiji while I was in that mode, while we were kind of working. And plus, keep in mind too, context for everyone listening is Kijiji.ca in those years was not a small website. In Canada alone, I mean, my team was responsible for running 4 to 5 billion ad impressions a month. It's a crazy number for a .ca.
That is.
So on the outside, people didn't realize how big of a platform that marketplace was. And so that's what always kept us busy, educating, and we had so much to play with that there was no shortage of things to do.
How did the opportunity to join Advance powered by Loblaw come about?
Yeah, so formerly Loblaw Media. And so there was obviously the news where Loblaw had purchased or had acquired the iReturn tech came out. And I had worked with the iReturn team during my All of Media days, right? All under the Torstar Digital banner. So I knew Ian Hewitson and a bunch of the folks over there. And so when that news broke that Loblaw had acquired their tech, the first thing I thought was, oh, that's interesting. What are they doing with the tech? So I reached out to Ian and we had a great conversation. It was when was this? This was the summer of 2021 by this point. So, we're still in the pandemic, still in lockdown. And, 2020 was a tough year if you were a publisher monetizing through ads. So it was really the first time that I was like, okay, I should look at what's happening in the industry a little bit more. You put your head above water and see what's happening. And so Ian and we just kept talking through that summer. And, he would randomly reach out to me and say, hey, I was in a conversation talking about ad ops and your name popped up. Or, hey, we're thinking about doing this, implementing GAM, Google Ad Manager. Not too many folks on this side know how to use that platform. You guys use that at Kijiji. I said, yeah, I've used it since Dart days. So, so again, it was a bit of a right time, right place. And Ian was a great champion of getting me over there. So they created a role for me at that point, which would then encompass all of the media execution teams. So there was an ad ops team who was doing the on-site kind of ad ops through GAM. And then they had some media buyers kind of in different pockets. And this role was created to kind of bring all of those folks together under one space. So it was an opportunity, especially with retail media, kind of just starting to take off a little bit. It was interesting. It was new, good learning experience because I had not experienced the buy side since obviously the All of Media days, and that was more of an ad network play, not necessarily what buy side is today. So again, it was one of those things where I just recognized, hey, I don't know enough about this space. Here's an opportunity. I should probably take it.
And there were other media channels that doesn't look like you've worked on before, like digital out of home and paid search, possibly social as well too. So you're leading third-party media buying in those media channels. Are those some of the areas where you really had to learn?
Yeah, I mean the role itself was leading all of the digital media buying and ad operations. So if you think about on-site, especially for retail media networks, on-site will be your classic playbook. Then you have in-store, right? So you have digital screens and audio, and then all of the off-site digital channels, like you said, paid search, social, CTV, video, digital out of home. Some of those were learning curves for sure. But I think the nuances of the individual inventory types are different, but what it takes to operationalize and deliver, and running a team of folks who are essentially at operations, but we'll call it media execution for the sake of blah blah. It was all similar to what I had done previously. And then working with stakeholders. You have to know how to work with the sales team, with client services / account management. You got to work with finance. You got to work with strategy and product. And so those were similar enough that I felt confident that I could go in there. And then the nuances of those other channels, yeah, that was a learning curve for sure. But I was happy to take that.
Okay, so let's bring everything full circle. The idea for ProOps, where did it first come from?
Yeah, so I think there's probably two main reasons why ProOps Consulting made sense in my mind. One was I had noticed that there was maybe a bit of a growing knowledge gap in the industry, in so much that when I moved from sell side to buy side, I was always under the assumption that publishers, at least the digital media teams of publishers, thought about things the same way, and we're all kind of working with the buy side in a similar fashion. That is not the case. When I moved to the buy side, I quickly realized that maybe we're not all thinking about this the same way. And then while I was in the retail media space, I also realized that, hey, there aren't a lot of folks here at the time that really understand the end-to-end on the operations flow. Like, there was a couple of us who recognized that, hey, managing through individual spreadsheets and different teams maybe isn't the most efficient. And so we implemented a order management system flow, and we got that working to really streamline the processes and workflows for operations. And that was pre-sales to invoicing. So everything involved in buying digital media that encompasses. So that knowledge gap, and just the 17 plus years that I had at that point, I felt like I could offer a bit of knowledge, a bit of expertise to maybe some companies, whether you're a publisher, in-house digital team, or retail media network, to help them. And also maybe just to leapfrog some of the learnings. Like, why go through a learning curve if someone is out there and can help? So that was one, the knowledge gap that I was noticing. The second one was really the rise of retail media. 2021 is where I kind of entered into that space, and Loblaw was ahead of its time, I will say. But then this past year, so 2024, we saw other retail media networks starting to make a splash or get announced. And now globally, retail media is this rising thing that is got so much opportunity. But then again, why should they go through the same learning curve we went through 3 years ago? Why not leverage some of that knowledge and expertise and leapfrog? If you want scalable growth immediately as a retail media network, then you shouldn't be doing things manually, or at least not your entire business model manually. And so there's a need on the operations side to get that right and to build the foundation. And so those were the kind of two buckets I was thinking about when launching ProOps Consulting. And then, because the focus really is on the operational side, there aren't too many folks offering that from a strategic consulting or advising role. There's a lot of sales and strategy consultants from what I've seen, but the operations teams and the folks who are doing the work, there aren't a lot of folks out there who are helping them. Where I'm not offering managed service, I'm not offering to be an outsourced ad ops person. I'm offering to help you build the workflows, build the processes to really set you up for scale.
Do you work with like entrepreneurial mentors just to kind of understand how you invoice people or what you charge them? Like, the value of your work, but to kind of test the market to see what the market is willing to bear to pay for, say, for example, your hourly services or however it is you package things up?
I haven't done anything official, but I will say that I'm fortunate that I've got a great network here in not just in Canada, but globally, just from my time at eBay Classifieds Group or Loblaw Media. And so I did early on, I did sit down with a number of folks and just ask them, and whether they were doing their own thing, so they were entrepreneurs and running consultancies, or they were working with them. So that was one of the things I did very early on as I was thinking about this. And then, like you just pointed out too, I mean, the value you put on your expertise and experience, that's the value. And so I didn't want to think too hard about it either. I like to keep things simple, and anyone who's worked with me knows that. I don't need to make the lives of media teams more difficult. Like, here's the hourly rate. Here's what I can offer. If you want it as a package, here you go. But like, go through that quickly so then you can focus on work and getting things done.
What's the conversation like with your family? Like letting them know that you're going to be leaving a consistent paycheck to do something that could pay off very well, but only in the long run.
Well, I think obviously I have a great partner who supports my ideas, my random thoughts and things. My kids are young, so they're 2 boys, 2.5 years old. They're in daycare, so everyone's doing their thing. And when kind of I was discussing this with my partner, her and I, like, we had an honest conversation. I said, I feel good about this decision, not only because I think the idea is an interesting one, but I think there's a need for it in the market. And I said, if I don't try it now, it's never going to be a good time. And if I don't do it soon, if I wait and think about this even more, then it's like someone else will do it. And so the timing just felt right. So I left Loblaw in October, and I knew that I needed to get out and start planting the seeds of this ProOps Consulting, this new endeavor, in Q4, knowing full well that Q4 is a terrible time to launch a business. But I did that strategically because people are thinking about the next year in Q4. Like in Q4, you're just trying to get things done, but you're planning on your next year and kind of what you do. And so I knew that if I had the conversations early, that was fine. And so a bit of pre-selling for that first quarter. And then I've given myself a timeline to see how this does. It's may not be a forever thing. It may be a forever thing, but at the very least, I'm giving it a go, and I'm excited for it. I've got a product that I'm working on with a developer. We're working on an AdOps efficiency tool because of my experience leading AdOps teams. So I'm looking forward to that. But the consultancy advising is one that I'm in. I'm really driving for.
And Chris, where did the name ProOps come from?
That's funny. I wrote down a number of ideas, and my co-founder and I, when we looked at ProOps, we're like, that kind of sounds funny if you just read it as ProOps, and we laughed, of course, because we're like, oh, that's a funny startup name. But if you think about ProOps, right, it encompasses like my 17 plus career in 17 plus year career in operations. Like, I am absolutely pro operations. So this feels right. And then it's one of those things where your first idea is probably your best one. So it was one of the first things on the list. It was the one we laughed about first. And we said, let's go for it. Nothing's a forever thing. So if we change the name later on, so be it. But ProOps felt right.
Chris, if anyone listening to this wants to get a hold of you to learn more about ProOps, how can they get in touch?
We do have a website, so proopsconsulting.ca. Otherwise, I'm on LinkedIn. You'll see at least a weekly post from me to talk about all this wonderful world of operations, media operations specifically. Or you can email me directly at chris@proopsconsulting.ca.
Really enjoyed our chat. You ready for rapid fire questions?
Let's do it.
The campaign you are most proud of?
Yeah, I was trying to think of this one. Listen, there's 17 plus years. There's too many to name a single one, but I think the common theme is that it's something that had never been done before. It was something new, and it was always a unique creative execution. And I wish I could have thought of a better example, but I'd say that's the general theme.
Okay, your favorite movie?
Yeah, this was a tough one. So I'll give you two that I could watch forever. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. We Are the Knights Who Say Ni. I could laugh at that movie just on repeat forever. And then Wayne's World. And it was kind of a toss-up between Wayne's World and Tommy Boy, to be honest with you. But I think I could quote Wayne's World more than Tommy Boy.
Not to get sidetracked, but did you see the Uber Eats Wayne's World commercials?
I did.
Weren't those incredibly nostalgic?
Yes, they were. It would have been funnier if it was Domino's, but yes.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
Yeah, I don't think I've got a good answer for this one. So ask me again in 10 years, because all the chapters, probably the better chapters, are happening now with young kids and this new entrepreneurial side. So ask me again later.
All right, I'll bring you back on in 10 years. My follow-up to that, if Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
I think I wrote down Quinn, hilarity ensues. It's a term that hilarity ensues is a term I use often with a few of my friends. So that feels about right.
Your favorite book?
Yeah, we can swear on here, right?
Fuck yeah.
That's okay. So I would say top of the list is The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. And what's funny about that book is for the first half of the book, he makes incredibly insightful points. And then you could tell that his publisher asked him for like too many pages and he kind of rambles. So even if you only read the first half of that book, it's incredible.
Your favorite song?
Go with the Bob Dylan, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Even though, as we said earlier, the mighty Quinn the Eskimo would also suffice.
The best advice you have ever received?
Yeah, there's a lot. I've worked with some pretty insightful people, but I will give another shout out to Mark Lister on this one for his CIA, which was something he always mentioned. And CIA stands for Control, Influence, Acceptance. You got to learn what you can control, what you can influence, and accept some things that you can't do control or influence.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
Yeah, slow down. Just take a breath, enjoy the moments because they go by quickly.
My signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
Honestly, looking out kind of in this world right now, I would say a trade of some kind. Carpenter, electrician, something where I would actually work with my hands, because I love to putter, and as a cottage owner, you tend to putter more than you sit on the dock, which I love anyway, because you're focused on one task rather than run around doing a million things. You're literally just trying to get one thing done at a time, which is both therapeutic and fun.
And we're going to end things right here. Chris, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.